Good morning, everyone. This is Denise Speck, President of Education Minnesota. We are going to start our assembly here. Just wanted to do a few housekeeping things before we get into our comments. One is if you could make sure that you are muted, we would really appreciate that. So welcome. Today we're talking about how we fight back against the big money forces that want to break our union and prevent us from ever fully funding our schools. We have an excellent agenda coming up, and I'd like to thank everybody in advance who will be participating tonight. All of our speakers, thank you. And thank you to our great staff for putting this agenda together. We will hear from our colleagues about their victories around racial justice, back to school, and building safety. You'll hear from our attorneys about your rights during these difficult times. And you will leave today, you will leave today with some information you can use to engage your colleagues and neighbors back home. Finally, we will have a special guest at the end who will tie it all up, and I can't wait for that. But before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples on whose land we meet. We thank them and their relatives for their care of the land, and we recognize their continuing connection to the land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to them and their culture, both past and present. So we have about 480 people signed up to join us tonight. So we are going to need to observe some norms for this meeting. First of all, you will be muted for most of today's presentation so that we can all hear each other. Our presenters are going to be using the chat box to communicate information with you, such as links to documents. So please do not use the chat for side conversations because we're going to lose a lot of information that way. Plus, we want to make sure that everybody has access to all of the information. So keeping the side comments out of the chat would be helpful. But use it if you're having technical problems. We want to help you and someone will connect with you. There will be portions of our meeting where there'll be questions and answers, and our presenters will be giving specific information about how to participate there. With those logistics out of the way, I want to say on behalf of everyone at Education Minnesota, thank you for being on this Zoom meeting, for volunteering your time, your experience, and your passion for your students during this campaign season. Educators cannot deliver the learning we know our students deserve without pro-education leaders in the legislature and in Washington. Your work over the next 2.5 months will be crucial, bringing us all together to elect those leaders. In the first part of our program this afternoon, you're going to hear from our colleagues about how they've organized to win things their locals needed. As we listen, you should remember something has become almost self-evident this past year. When we fight, we win. I know that SEIU uses that slogan and we have discovered it also. It's true. When we fight, we win. We fight because most of us believe that every child, no matter their zip code, their grade, their color of their skin, every child deserves a safe and welcoming school where they can thrive. But for too long, certain politicians have deprived our public schools the resources they need to reach and teach each child because they've denied our families tests, just as they've denied our families tests and treatment during this pandemic. These are the same powerful few who are trying to divide us by race and by place, insisting we put our children and teachers at risk and leaving parents scrambling for solutions to a crisis they created. They hope to distract us from their failure to prevent and curb COVID-19 and to ensure our schools can fulfill their promise to every one of our students. We see through their lies. We fight because we know that we can't go back to business as usual. Because business as usual didn't work for many students, and business as usual is what turned a new virus into a global pandemic. We know that our educators and students must stay physically apart until we have a vaccine or other means to control the spread of COVID-19, and until schools have the resources to ensure everyone in them can stay well. We win by pulling together, Black, white, and brown, rural and urban, young and old, to demand safe, fully funded schools. We can prevent unnecessary illness, save thousands of lives, and ensure a better, brighter tomorrow for all our children, no exceptions. But none of this can happen if we don't take the first step and stand up and make our voices heard. Now, I'm proud to introduce 3 great educators who will share their stories of how they fought and won. Our first speaker is Mariah Roberson Moody, and the first president of the ESP chapter of MFT Local 59 in Minneapolis. Mariah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good.
So hi, just Mariah.
Correction, thank you. I'm the first vice president.
Yes, thank you. First vice president. Oh my goodness, we've given you other jobs as if you don't have enough to do.
That's okay. But yeah, I'm glad to be here today to meet with all of you other educators and things like that as we fight during these times. As you guys know, we have 2 pandemics going on. We have COVID as well as the racism that has existed in our country since the beginning. So I was brought here today to speak about my own experiences with racism and things like that in our district as well as within our union. I am a person of color. I identify as Black. And that is something that I've experienced from even other educators, you know, while I was working in Minneapolis public schools. So it's something that has been really a big focus for our union for sure, as well as the police brutality that happens in our communities, you know, with the things that happened with George Floyd, as well as the other countless Black, brown, and indigenous communities that continue to be publicly brutalized by police and other institutions with no consequences or forms of accountability. It's really our union's job to fight back against those things, because those are our students that are being criminalized a lot of the time, or their families. So I'll just start off with the work that we're doing around the getting SROs out of schools. Following the death of George Floyd, Minneapolis, along with other parts of the country, there was obviously a big uprising and push for police to get out of a lot of spaces. And Minneapolis Public Schools was no exception. We've been pushing to get SROs out of schools for a long time. This has been a long-standing debate, and that finally happened in June of this year. We had a rally to really demonstrate how much communities and educators wanted SROs to be out of our schools. So that was a huge victory after a long time. And the results of that, because it doesn't end at just SROs being taken out of our schools, there is a process of replacing who is going to be the first responder when there is an emergency crisis that can't be dealt with within the building or can't be dealt with by ESPs or other security staff that are in the building. So there was actually a process that they started to hire people with criminal justice backgrounds to replace what would be an SRO position. So we were very concerned about this, rightfully so. That was the only qualification that they really looked for, was a criminal justice background. There wasn't very much experience that they wanted with students and things like that. And you know, knowing that our members, especially ESPs, paraprofessionals, are the main ones that are responding when students are in crisis and things like that. We knew that that would mean more work on our members. So we've been fighting to really be a part of the decision-making process when it comes to who's going to be replacing people in those positions. And that's something that's been kind of public. The district did try to shut us out, but we really did push for them to have more community involvement, have all stakeholders, students, families, you know, school communities, as well as educators to decide what was going to be an adequate replacement and what safety really looked like for them in their own school communities. So that is a continued fight that we have going on, but we were able to get our own members on the interview team. So that's a big win for us and something that we'll keep focusing on. But I think in terms of what we're doing now with our own members, we are questioning like what school safety is beyond policing, trying to really focus on recognizing staff that do provide safety in our schools for our students, as well as our staff, people like security monitors, people like ESPs that, like I said, are the first responders and really dealing with a lot of students in crisis, as well as how we can bring in other professionals, more professionals to really deal with the cycles of violence that lead to a lot of the things that go on within our schools. So trying to address it in a more practical way rather than the same systems that have clearly not worked over time, as well as really trying to focus on school climate as well. Our educators are a part of the school to prison pipeline, and that's just a reality. So really challenging a lot of the mindsets that our own educators might have that perpetuate racism within our schools, and really doing everything with a centered focus on racial equity and in everything that we do, including the conversation around school safety. So yeah, that's what we're doing so far with the SRO stuff and safety within schools. In terms of racial equity and things like that, we've been really focused on our members of color and trying to identify really problems that keep them from being a part of our union, identifying why they feel like it's not a space for them, and really trying to fight, not just say that we fight anti-racism or not just say that we are anti-racist, but actually show with action that is an issue that we're committed to solving. It's a full-time thing. And like I said before, we have to look at everything through a racial equity lens. So we're doing a lot of that work right now and really focused on our members of color as we move into the future. So.
Thank you, Mariah. Thank you for sharing your victory and your strategies for getting there. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Jessica Rice, a member of the Bloomington Federation of Teachers. Jessica?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Rice. I've been on the negotiating team for Bloomington for like 5 years or 6 years maybe. So Bloomington has been going through budget cuts for the last 10 years. We've been right-sizing the budget from 2 to 4 million for the last 10 years. So when the Governor Walz spoke about having the opportunity to go hybrid, was what our district was designated as based on the data. We reached out to our district to try to discuss safety plans. We wanted to work with them on safety. Our main goal was safety. Like, if you're going to have us go back, that's your decision, but we better go back safely. And so we quickly worked with the district. We tried to work with the district, but we didn't really get anywhere on safety plans with the district before they decided to go hybrid. So they decided to go hybrid, but they at least shared, as they should, their COVID preparedness plan. So as a union, we decided to take that plan and ask our members, what parts of the plan are they concerned about? Where are they most concerned about being kept reasonably safe in the classroom? And what we learned is that 52% of our members that took the survey, 70% of our members took the survey, 52% said they do not intend to return, that they were going to seek accommodations or they were going to ask for a leave. And so we knew our members were obviously rightfully so nervous about returning to the classroom. And so we knew we had to work with the district to improve the safety plan, but also make sure they understood their rights around leaves. And so we decided to have 2 town hall meetings where we reflected the data back to them and we shared with them, like, here's the data that we learned from you guys. You're not alone. You're all concerned about these different components of the safety plan. And then we were also able to say, like, here are your rights and leaves. So we were able to speak to and use some of the Education Minnesota documentation around like the leaves and like what types of leaves people would qualify for, and share with our members how to take advantage of those leaves to keep their families safe. And so we took, with that, in the next week, enough members emailed requesting leaves, enough members spoke out of concerns around the safety plan. And by a week later, the district had then re-voted and decided as a school board to go distance-based. So we were able to kind of shift the tide by just, basically informing our members of their rights. And we also took that data, we did take the data to the district in between that vote and that member town hall. We took the data to our district as well and kind of spoke to some of the safety pieces that we were concerned about, because we know we have fewer custodians, we have fewer people in the building that can support the hybrid learners if our other staff members need leaves. And we knew that with less staff in our building and then staff that didn't feel confident coming back because of their own health concerns, that we would not be able to fully staff this. And that's what our district determined after that 2 weeks between those 2 votes to go hybrid and then to go distance. They decided they didn't have the staff to fund the hybrid plan, to also staff a Bloomington online school, as well as a hybrid flex, which is that distance option that families have a right to per Governor Walz's executive order. So our district learned they couldn't manage all of those plans, and that's really because of our members speaking up about their rights, but also because we just don't have the staff in our buildings. Our buildings are already shortchanged. We don't have enough people running our schools. We've been working at the bottom of the barrel for a while. So that's kind of our Bloomington story, and thankfully we're distance learning until October, and we'll still be working on safety plans in case we do decide to go back to make sure our members stay safe.
Thank you. Great work. Our final presenter for this portion of the program is Amanda Hand from Cook County.
Thank you. I really appreciate being able to be here tonight. And it was great to hear from the other speakers. So I'm a product of the Minneapolis Public Schools, but I teach and work here in Cook County, Minnesota, far northeastern corner of the state. So we're a small rural district. We're pre-K-12 in one building. We have about 44 members, give or take, in our local total. So everything we do here ends up being very personal and often ends up on the front page of the newspaper. So we also won a fight and are still fighting that fight and trying to win some more safety for our district. We started the summer with a planning committee that began meeting every week, and we had teachers from each of our buildings on that committee, and they kind of served as the eyes and ears on the ground and began to get a real clear sense that our administration was really focused solely on being able to go back in person, and that was the bulk of what they were planning for. So at that point, those teachers had already been having conversations with all of us about the planning that was going on, but we came together as a union and surveyed all of our membership to see how folks felt about that, where our comfort level was with that. And through that survey, we learned that the vast majority of us did not feel safe with the plans that were being developed and did not feel safe with an in-person or even a hybrid model coming into play. So armed with that data, having a sense that it was the bulk of our membership, we began to have a number of union meetings. We had Zoom meetings as well as Slack channels going to really hash out where people's concerns were. And from there, we developed an LCAT team to fine tune our strategy for how we were going to approach the district and hopefully move things in a safer direction. So that smaller organizing team came up with 2 or 3 talking points that we were going to target. And we brainstormed a list of key community members who might also support our perspective and began a strategy for how to reach out to them and ask them to also reach out to the school board, as well as our own membership reaching out to the school board. Our local came up with created a statement, drafted a statement about our safety stance and why we were advocating for distance learning. And we shared that with our board and a summary of that with the community through our local Facebook page. And then we had other families reaching out to the board as well. And throughout this process, we took a couple of other votes, met with our union to say, again, you know, sort of here's what we're going forward with. We did another vote saying, if you're not fully in favor of distance learning, do you still feel comfortable with standing with the union or making a choice to step back from this one because it doesn't jibe with your personal opinions? And so those were really important layers to how we built this solidarity. We had a number of teachers who spoke at a school board meeting. Nothing was decided at that original meeting, but it really opened a much broader discussion. And eventually our school board did vote in favor of distance learning through October, at which point it will be reevaluated. And although what I'm here to focus on is safety, I will add that there was also a racial justice component to this safety work, in that a significant portion of the community that we serve are members of the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. And they have an education director who works independently for them, but liaisons with our district and other schools in the area. And the band was largely in favor of distance learning and had a lot of very serious concerns about coming back in person. And so we were able to amplify that concern on the part of the band. And likewise, they stood with us in those board meetings. So we still have a lot of work to go, but we built a lot of community, both within our union and then with our broader community. And hopefully we'll keep moving that ball towards safety. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. So I heard Mariah talk about getting community support, ensuring that the whole school community was part of decisions and having member voice at the table. I heard Jessica talk about constant communication with the members in her local, knowing where their members were at, and informing their members of their rights and building solidarity around that. And I heard Amanda talk about member data, getting member data, IDing concerns, and then developing a plan to win. That's how we win. We organize ourselves and our neighbors, we raise our collective voices, and we demand what's best for our whole public school community of students, educators, and staff, and all our loved ones at home. Well, we're going to move into the next section. Organizing and bargaining can protect us as we educate the children of Minnesota. But those are not our only options, as we will learn from the next part of our program. The past work of organized educators and the union movement lives on in the law. There are requirements for workplace safety already in place, and we can take that action, we can take action to protect ourselves if our work sites aren't safe during this pandemic. Now let's hear from two attorneys in Education Minnesota's legal department. Let's welcome Meg Luger and Jonathan Reiner.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody tonight. And we're going to try to cover your questions in this presentation, and we hopefully will have some time for a question or two at the end if I really am hasty. But if we can't get to your question and you want to put it in the chat, be sure to include your local, because then if we can't address it here, we can hopefully direct it in the right place afterward.
So Meg, point of clarification here. So if participants have questions for you, should they write them in the chat box?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then Jonathan and I will hopefully, between the two of us, be able to try to keep track of this as we roll through.
Okay.
All right, I am going to pull up a PowerPoint and just get rolling. Okay, so today we're going to just talk about some of the options that we have to organize around safety issues, knowing what the baseline for the safety requirements are, and then additionally identifying what individual and collective rights that we have to make sure that districts are doing what they're supposed to. So first, let's talk a little bit about the health and safety protections and actions that may be related to those. So first and foremost, most important law for worker safety on the books in Minnesota and also federally is OSHA. And what does OSHA require? It requires that you have a workplace that's free of anything likely to cause death or harm or serious injury. And that includes illness. So that is a baseline obligation that districts have, and in most years we're well exceeding it and not worrying about it, but this year we're obviously thinking quite a bit about it. And that is enforced by the State Department of Labor and Industry. So, and you know, the metric for assessing whether or not at this point you've got a workplace free of possible injury or you know, illness is by looking at Minnesota Department of Health guidance, which both the Minnesota Department of Health and then by reference the Minnesota Department of Education have put forth as sort of the baseline standards. And this includes training on safety guidelines. So individuals should know, you know, essentially what the district's obligations are and possibly their part in helping to maintain a safe work environment. So this includes in our schools with hybrid or distance learning, maintaining a very strict 6-foot distancing in schools. And in schools, there's actual guidance from the Department of Health that says you should have floor markers that let the kiddos know how far apart they need to stand in order to make that distance clear. In our household, we have dad distance because my husband is about 6 feet tall, so he lies on the ground and tells the kids that they can't get any closer to each other than from his head to his feet. But if you can't have Pete Nikolai in your school buildings, you need those floor markers. And then for in-person, this requirement is somewhat relaxed, and the assumption there is presumably that if there's less community spread, the risk is somewhat lower, but for in-person learning, it's creating as much space as is feasible. But they are more relaxed on that 6 feet piece. That doesn't mean we can't work for more, but that's kind of where the guidelines are set right now. And then the requirement for face coverings is both referenced in the most recent executive order pertaining to schools, 2082, but it was also made very clear in the executive order specifically for face coverings, and that was 2081. And so the kids 5 and over should be wearing face masks unless there's a medical or mental health exemption, and that is also true of adults. And then additionally, there's some other guidance that's a little more in the way of best practices, and that's, you know, keeping small groups from intermixing, you know, planning meals to keep students from getting together in the middle of the cafeteria. And then the basics, the stuff that was true at all points in time, which is kiddos have to be good on hand washing, good on coughing into their wings, and then copious amounts of hand sanitizer. So all those things are still expectations and will be if you're working with kids directly, regardless of the model. And then additionally, the Department of Health has recommended using health checks like health questionnaires. So asking, you know, is the student or is an adult experiencing symptoms of COVID? We want to distinguish, you know, they can inquire of adults, are you experiencing symptoms? They can't ask, have you gotten a positive COVID test? That in and of itself wouldn't be consistent with the Minnesota Human Rights Act, but they can ask if you've got a fever, and we want folks to be answering those truthfully. And then making sure there's appropriate cleaning supplies. And that people are trained on how to use them, so that it's a bigger lift than that. So what happens if these things, which have been made clear by the various state agencies, what happens if they're not what we're seeing in our schools? Well, this is where PELRA gives us the right to work together to make sure that these things are put in place. So first of all, PELRA protects employee advocacy. And that means that you have the right on the job to, with your coworkers or by yourself, advocate that you have a safe work environment. Safety is a mandatory subject of bargaining. It is a basic thing that you are guaranteed not only by OSHA, but the right to talk about under PELRA. And so, you know, we want to rely on that. And so the expression of views statute is the one that I have copied there. And that's one of my favorite statutes. And it is a good one for undergirding your right to advocacy. So what does that look like? It could look like public comment at school board meetings. It could look like rallies, which we have seen all week this week, and we hope that they keep coming. And I have noted that they should be socially distanced so that we can, as my boss said, practice what we preach. It could mean informational picketing, which is not the same as a strike, but it's picketing. And then additionally, it could mean social media campaigns. And my only caveat on social media campaigns is that we'd want to try to make sure that we look at the district policies and see what they have to say about social media references, which isn't to say that you wouldn't do it, but we would assess what the consequences would be of undertaking that work. Okay, what if they're unsafe? What are our rights under OSHA? So OSHA also gives you a parallel right to PELRA to advocate for them to be safe. So you are protected under more than one statute if you go to your employer and say, this isn't right, we don't have enough hand sanitizer, or there isn't sufficient cleaning between classes. And they're not, you can't be subject to discipline or any other negative employment action because you had this advocacy. And if you work with the employer and things don't change, you have the right to not continue to work in that environment. You can't be fired for that. So that's the good faith right to refuse. Now, you do have to talk to the employer first. That's kind of our least favorite part about this statute, is that you have to sort of experience the condition and then try to work through it. But if that's not availing, you can leave until things are the way they should be. Similarly, very similarly, there is the State Whistleblower Act. And this law was adopted to actually put in writing something that had been common law in the courts, but is now a statutory protection. That as is the case under OSHA, if the employer refuses to fix an unsafe condition, you can say, I'm not going to work until this is fixed. Now, what we want in this case is to know, which piece of Department of Health requirements is not being implemented, because you are refusing to work because you think that the employer is violating some type of rule, regulation, or law. And it shortens up the conversation considerably if we know which law or regulation we're talking about. So a good faith belief that something bad has happened is definitely protected, but the more we're familiar with what that thing is, the better off we are in making our case to the employer. And then what if conditions are unsafe for you? So what if you're in a situation in which the district is adhering to guidelines, but because of an underlying health condition or because of something you're experiencing, you yourself can't experience work safely? Well, then we have accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's federal law, and the Minnesota Human Rights Act, state law. And you are entitled to request accommodations. At this point, the CDC has identified which underlying conditions make you particularly susceptible to really bad COVID experiences. And those are things for which reasonable accommodations you should be able to ask and receive those. Not going into a full ADA analysis, but what I will say is that if you're not getting anywhere with human resources or your principal, contact us, because we want to help with that. And if you have to come into work, or if you have to take leave until the situation is straightened out, know that you're not waiving your right to continue talking about what accommodations are best for you. Now, this is different than what I just talked about with respect to PELRA, with respect to OSHA and the Whistleblower Act. You're not like walking off the job because things are unsafe. You're asking for accommodations and may need to leave. And that's a little bit different, but nonetheless, the question is, how do we work together to make things happen? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about strikes under PELRA, and this is where I become kind of the bummer patrol. So the requirements for a lawful strike under PELRA are very specific and very hidebound, and we're probably under very few circumstances going to be able to meet them, because I think everybody's in contract at this point. You have to have an expired contract, you need to be in negotiations, have been mediating, have had a cooling off period, and then have also appropriate notification to the district. So none of that's going to be true for anybody who's working under a live collective bargaining agreement, which means that if you strike, it's not going to be a protected PELRA action. So any other strike that takes place that's not consistent with PELRA is made illegal by PELRA. And the consequences of not following that law are pretty significant. So first of all, an employer could go to court and seek an injunction, which is the more inconvenient way of being told not to do something than simply being told not to do it, because it means the judge is mad at you and so is probably everybody else. Additionally, it can be an unfair labor practice because you're violating the part of PELRA that says when a lawful strike is authorized. And then for the individual employees who participate in an unlawful strike, they can be terminated and not replaced. Now, typically in state law, if it's a lawful strike, you can't be replaced. They've got to, or at least not permanently replaced. And so this is something that we want to make sure is not, that we're not in the position of having to defend, because the big problem is sort of the PELRA death penalty, which is that the union can lose its exclusive representative status for 2 years. And if the BMS determines that you participated in a strike that wasn't authorized by PELRA, that's the penalty. There is no debate about it. There is no gradations. That is a shall impose if that's the determination. So we want to be right with the law, and we want to talk about collective action, but we want to use the language that enables us to talk about it and not incur legal penalties that we don't want. So it could be the case that you feel unsafe at work and you want to invoke your rights under the whistleblower law and OSHA, and that is permissible. And in fact, multiple people at the same time can do those things, and the union can support them. We can provide lots of information to members about what their rights are, and when the ability to leave the job to maintain their safety is something that is necessary. We just want to avoid treating it as a union sponsored event, because we, don't want to not have a union. So union assisted, that I have no problem worrying about defending. Union sponsored, then we're going to have some hard conversations with the Bureau of Mediation Services. All right. So let's talk about one of the most fundamental acts of collective advocacy, one of the places where we can work hardest to pull together, and that's bargaining. And I am deeply grateful every day to our folks, Mark and Andrea in the negotiations department, because they put together wonderful resources about, with a sample memorandum of understanding, model language, things that can be retrofitted to your individual needs to support bargaining over health and safety. And this is something that PELRA obligates employers to bargain over. Now, one of the things that we've encountered in the last couple of weeks is employers saying, well, we've got a locked up contract, we don't have a duty to bargain. And that's not really true, because under the law, employers have an obligation to engage in effects bargaining, meaning even if something happens for which they don't have an obligation to bargain, if the effect of that implicates your terms and conditions of employment, they got to bargain over that. So, for example, if people are being directed to clean their classrooms, we can bargain over appropriate supplies and making sure that they're safe for the person who's using them, and making sure that they've got training so that they're not, using them in a way that's ineffective. Those are all things over which an employer should bargain and needs to bargain. So worker safety is definitely in the package of terms and conditions of employment. And, bargaining should start with a demand to bargain. The demand to bargain means, we're saying we want to talk about these things. Here are the dates that were available. And the reason why this is important is not because there's something magical about having written it down, but simply because it's evidence that it happened. So the employer can't have plausible deniability about whether or not there really was a demand. And so, if it's something that's in your contract, that is a place where, for example, an employer may say, I don't need to bargain over creating more leaves for people. Well, that may be. Some employers may choose to, just under the circumstances. Some employers may say that they don't have to create more leaves. On the other hand, if there's a dispute about what happens when, for example, somebody is exposed to COVID and is not sick, but needs to quarantine, how do they get paid? Does that individual have to draw on their own sick leave even though they're not sick? Well, that's not what the contractual sick leave provision says. Should that person be on administrative leave? There probably isn't a contractual provision that covers that. That's something for which bargaining should take place. So, equipment, cleaning protocols. How do we look at the schedule to talk about social distancing? Those are things that there are Department of Health guidelines, but they are things that we can certainly negotiate over. And then, okay, leave provisions. See, I've done this every single time. Leave provisions and ensuring pay during self-isolation. Yes, those are things that we need to talk about. and the district is obligated to. Now, one thing that we have also seen, in addition to districts kind of giving a straight up Heisman and being obnoxious, is districts saying, we are happy to collaborate with you on a number of issues and blah, 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 blah. So I'm not to say the collaboration isn't important. It obviously very much is. And I certainly would never say that it is not. But it is, I think we need to determine when they're refusing to negotiate and when they're using a synonym so they don't have to use the word negotiate. And if they got to take a, you know, circumlocuting walk around the block to not say the word bargain, then I think we can help them and then just try to get what we need written down. So if the employer refuses to bargain, like straight up says, no, I won't talk to you and we'll see you on opening day, that may be an unfair labor practice. And if that's the case, contact your field staff as soon as possible after they decline to meet to negotiate. And we'd like to get that, you know, made pretty clear. And again, distinguishing between the actual refusal and the sort of refusal to say that, like, concede that they're negotiating, even though they're kind of going through what we would consider to be a negotiating process. There is a Public Employment Relations Board, the PERB, and that is where we would file charges regarding unfair labor practices at this time. And that process will hopefully be streamlined, but the bad news is that the only labor representative on that is me, and I can't hear your charges because I'll probably be your lawyer or one of my friends will. So we are going to need to continue to work with the governor to get somebody else appointed to hear charges coming from Education Minnesota. And then establishing a health and safety committee on an ongoing basis. I think a lot of folks may have an LMC directed to this, and so it's possible that you'll be able to just, you know, work with the existing processes that you have. But the governor did recommend the creation of the quote unquote incident command teams, which sound fancy to me, and they are something that really would be in the form of an LMC, although they should include, you know, parents and other public school constituencies as well. And you'd want to think about minimum meeting parameters. So for example, we've got a number of school districts who have, you know, opened in hybrid, but they also already have a phased calendar for when they're going to go to in-person learning. So every 2 weeks, we're going to add a grade is a model that I have heard. Well, you would definitely want to be meeting at least every 2 weeks to determine whether or not that still is a good plan based on the, you know, your staffing levels and based on your, you know, the existing COVID cases in your county. So, you know, those are the sorts of things that you'd want to keep in mind. And then who's on the committee, and then thinking about, you know, what are the communication guidelines for when people see safety violations? Who do we call right away? Do we call somebody in facilities? Do we call human resources? That's kind of what we're thinking about. Okay, and then messaging. So we are, everybody is fired up and ready to go, right? We are all ready to go, and we are all talking about it in a different way. And AFT has authorized what it called safety strikes. And we've said we'll do whatever it takes. And President Specht, who I'm quoting while looking at her, said that nothing is off the table. And that's true. We want to support everybody in the actions that that help their local the most. And we want to make sure that people are working together and really continuing to build solidarity that you can build on in the future. But okay, there might be a murder taking place in my living room. I'm very sorry. However, we want to, when we're talking about the work stoppage in particular, or we're talking about informational picketing, we want to be really assiduous about referring to OSHA and the Whistleblower Act, or making sure that when we talk about picketing that we're saying no work stoppage, you know, that we're not refusing to work as a strike. And this is a language issue, but it's an important one. We don't have to work in unsafe conditions, but we do have to invoke the right law when we say why we're not. And that's true even if multiple people want to take action. Okay. I'd really like to give myself kudos for being efficient, and so we could probably hit a couple of questions.
Well, Jonathan looks like he's catching up to all the questions in the chat. Can you see where he left off? And do you want to take the ones that are in the chat right now?
I'm at Jasmine. Can teachers support community members in boycotting unsafe schools if bargaining and striking is not an option?
Jonathan, can you hit me with that one more time?
Sure. Can teachers support community members, such as parents, students, local residents, in boycotting unsafe schools if bargaining or striking is not an option?
I'm Jasmine. I wrote that question. I can elaborate. I live in the St. Paul Public School District, but I'm a teacher at a different district. I still have friends that work in the district. So my question is, if I know, because of the friends and the family in my community, that St. Paul Public Schools are not following safe procedures, could I help boycott without losing my position, right, as an educator?
Yes. So for example, if first and foremost, if PPS was going into hybrid or in person and it was not safe and we were rallying, or there were pickets, or there, any of those actions, you can absolutely participate in those, because the PELRA, both protections and then also the prohibitions, kind of the water's edge is your status as a public employee. So once you're a community member or a mom or a parent, it's the First Amendment, baby.
Does that translate to the district I work in? Can I support that if it's not the district I live in or I'm a parent of that district?
If it's the parent, if you're employed in that district, then we're still talking PELRA, and we still want to be cautious about how we talk about, what the actions are that we're taking.
Thank you.
Looks like we're catching up to the rest of the questions. Do we still have time for more?
I think we still have a couple of minutes before
One more from Brad here is, what if 6 feet distancing is 5 feet between students and desks? What issues does that present?
Well, if they're not 6 feet apart, like you can take out 2 meter sticks and you can't fit them both between the kids, and you're in hybrid, or it's distance learning, but there's some component of in-school instruction, that's not enough. And so we've got to, at that point, raise the issue with the employer and try to figure out how to create that additional space. And if that's not availing, then we've got to talk to OSHA.
I have a question, actually, on behalf of kindergarten teachers in my district. In order to bring kindergarten students in our hybrid model back full classes face-to-face 4 days a week, in order to adjust to the physical distancing, they created a second classroom for the kindergarten teachers, which would be staffed by a paraprofessional. Now we know that paraprofessionals can't give any instruction, so basically it would be like babysitting for a good part of the day. So could you speak to that, Meg?
Yeah, and I can say, the work of all of our educators is important, and I think that it's possible that what would happen in the defensible way that would probably look is, students are given work that is self-directed if they're old enough for that to make any sense. If you said kindergarten, that's probably not the case, but self-directed to the extent possible. And then they're supported in that work. And that happens in every classroom and with staff, in varying certification levels. What is always kind of at top of mind for me is that a number of districts have typically or traditionally said that we want kids supervised by licensed personnel, and I think they feel like that's important for MDE, and also important potentially for the way that they count instructional hours. And I think it doesn't surprise me to see certain relaxation of that, but I would suggest that we need to talk about is if folks, if kiddos are going to be supervised by somebody other than the teacher of record, how much extra work is the teacher going to be doing to make sure that they can, split their class in half and not be with some of them for some period of the day. And so I think that is a question to have about curriculum and about workload.
Thank you.
There's a question from THM Guthrie. Is there a listing of what every different school district is doing, a master list? I believe Education Minnesota staff is compiling that information. It is hard to know because
Jonathan, I can say that, that it is hard to know because it's changing almost daily. You know, when a school board meets and reverses course, you know, then we have to update that info. But we are going to try to get that on our website somehow, or at a minimum, get the information out to local presidents once a week. We typically have an email that goes out to local leaders every Thursday. So we would likely, you know, try to get it in there once a week at a minimum so we can get that out there.
One question that I got sort of outside of the public chat was the question of sick outs as a possible collective action. And I gotta say that it is not highly recommended because, first of all, the definition of what constitutes a strike under PELRA is quite broad, and it includes any kind of work slowdown or work stoppage, which I think would be covered by that. Additionally, for us, you know, the sick leave, if people are drawing their sick leave, you got to verify that you're sick. You don't necessarily need to bring a doctor's note, but you at least have to vouch for the fact that you are sick. So you could get in trouble for both things, right? For not being honest about the reason for which you're using the sick leave, and then additionally the sick out itself. And the sick leave piece, you may be willing to take your lumps, but the sick out as a potential wildcat action would be suboptimal. We don't recommend that. And the consequences would be quite significant.
Another question in the chat from Peter Engelbertson. Anoka Hennepin Local 7007 was initially requesting members sign permission to access all medical records. What do we need to legally provide to support an application for medical accommodations such as working from home?
Well, you definitely don't need to provide all medical records. Like that is, so what the ADA and what the Minnesota Human Rights Act say is that the employer is entitled to have as much information as they need to know, you know, what the basis for the accommodation is, what the, you know, what nature of accommodation might be appropriate and how long they might have to do it. But they don't get to, you know, find out everything that happened when you were 19 or anything like that. It's got to be work related.
Just put a sample medical provider in the forum in the chat. It's an Education Minnesota document. Yep, Meg's exactly right. These wide scoping waivers are not generally permitted. It's got to be related and more narrowly tailored.
And then how about employees? Do they have standing to sue if they get COVID at work and the district didn't enforce state safety standards? The answer to that is generally no. Minnesota has a workers' compensation law, and that provides what's usually referred to as the exclusive remedy for individuals who are injured or hurt at work. I think the tough thing is that there isn't a presumption if somebody contracts an illness at work, there isn't usually a presumption that it was because of work, as opposed to, you know, if you trip over a radiator and break your ankle on the job, that's going to be a work comp injury, right? But it is not the case if you, for example, contract COVID. That doesn't mean that people don't receive compensation for that, but for filing a first report of injury would be your first step on that. So you wouldn't be suing separately, you'd be seeking work comp benefits.
There's a couple of questions, one from Castaldi M and one from Teresa, basically on the subject. If you can work from home, can you work from home, or can your employer make you come into the work site to do work? We are pushing and advocating, and we have put some answers on this earlier in the chat, but we're pushing and advocating hard for you to be able to do that. There's executive orders that say if you can work from home, you must be able to work from home. That doesn't stop the employer from making these demands. It puts it on us to enforce those rights. Most likely through the grievance process, and again, talk to your field staff about those instances. because we're trying to stay on top of them.
So I think we have time for one more question, and I see two that are related. One, they're about cleaning, requirements of teachers to clean their classrooms, and infringement on other bargaining unit work, as well as requirements for teachers to clean in between classes, and not, being able to use that time for their own bathroom breaks. So you'll have a much better response than I do. Mine is going to be a little bit more colorful because I'm appalled by this, but I know it's happening. So give them some good advice here.
It's usually my job to have the colorful response. So, I mean, so first of all, the piece about the cleaning, so we have taken pretty early on and will continue to take the position that where there's, clear delineations of bargaining unit work, that needs to be respected. And we don't want to be part of a jurisdictional fight over who ought to be doing the cleaning. I think sometimes there is a little bit more fuzziness around this because everybody's job description includes a little caveat at the end that says other duties as assigned. So does that mean you get to do everybody else's job? Probably not. And I think we would talk about past practice, and we would talk about, what the bargaining unit lines are. And we just need to really continue to advocate that people who are employed to do a particular job do that job, so that we're not putting a janitor out of work and we're not wasting our own time doing the thing that we weren't hired to do. And then with respect to cleaning between, I think this is a subject of potential negotiation as well. For example, if they've got some kind of Baroque cleaning regimen that they want folks to engage in between classes, well, then the classes probably should be shorter. If you want to turn teachers into janitors, then, you still do get to get I don't know if you want to get a drink from the drinking fountain. I'm going to stop myself there. But you do get to go to the bathroom. You do get to hit your Nalgene bottle, and you don't have to give up the very minimal breaks that teachers get in a very long teaching day. That's something that we absolutely need. That is a perfect opportunity for good collective action because everybody will be feeling that pinch.
Thank you. Much better. I just think it's ridiculous. I just have to say, and a lot of these questions, I appreciated all of them so much. And I know that anything that we didn't get to, you're going to try to jot down and get to people after the session. But, it's very clear, especially around the cleaning issue. I know that we need to be flexible when we can. But very likely these situations are happening in a hybrid model, which we know, is very unsustainable as it is. And for most educators, no matter what you're doing in a school, it's not just one full-time job you're going to be doing. You're going to be doing a job and a half, if not two, because the requirements are so great. So piling on and asking people to do these extra duties or more than what they need to be doing is just asking for people to quit, to burn out, to leave the profession earlier than we know they need to. So whether it's working with your Education Minnesota field staff and our attorneys to help you bargain, accessing the bargaining department and making sure that you are bargaining language around this, we absolutely have to put a stop to this. We did a lot in the spring. We talked about that in the spring also in many of our meetings here. We dropped everything on a dime and changed our world in the spring because it was necessary. And many of us suffered because of that. Many of you were working from sunup to sundown. You had round-the-clock schedules, and it was very demanding. We have a chance to do things differently here. We have a chance to make sure that we are organizing and using our voices to make sure that we are safe and that children are safe. And there should not be any schools opening that are just not staffed and ready to open. In the next part of our program, we're going to talk a little bit more about what it means to be a worksite unity leader and to get an overview of some of the resources available for the work. We will also hear from Education Minnesota Vice President Bernie Burnham about the importance of organizing both inside and outside of our buildings in the communities and neighborhoods where our students and educators live. And we will finish up in about a half an hour with some specific asks for all of us and some comments from our special guest. So up next, let me introduce to you our next speaker, Paul Peltier. Paul?
Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Peltier. Thanks, Denise. I'm a 612 band and choir teacher up in Fosston, Minnesota. Full-time teacher. I see a lot of different kinds of kids all day long. I work in a team environment. I work solo show. We're an integrated staff. We have lots of people doing lots of work together. So I feel pretty lucky to work where I do. We're small local. We got 42 people in our bargaining unit and on our staff, and they're all really great, and they're all really struggling. They're all kind of wondering, what am I going to do now that this whole thing is happening the way it is? We just got out of our first day of in-service, and we actually start on, what is it, the 8th of September, which, and I talk about this all the time, so I'm sorry for those of you who have heard this from me before, is the day that our baby is due. So we have a baby coming on the first day of school, and not going to name it COVID, okay, just so you know, all right? It's a very stressful time for my wife. Like, I'm freaked out about bringing an upper respiratory disease home to our family. But I know that we're going to be in good hands because our teacher group has worked hand in glove and demanded that we work together with administration to make the best decisions possible. And so our story is a little bit of a story of success, and I want to share that a little bit with you today. The real power of our educator group is the power to demand and affect change, right? We are able to do this because we are stronger together and united in our cause. That gives us power and options that we would not have any other time, okay? This year is my first year as president of our small rural union. And a member came to me yesterday, and then we continued to text today about an issue that they were having trouble with. And I said, well, what's going on? And this member said, well, I'm having trouble figuring out how I can basically talk about what I need. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Tell me what you need, see if I can help you. And he's like, well, I have some pre-existing health conditions that I think I need to be at home for. I need to be teaching from home. And I said, well, what's going on? What have you been told? He says, well, I haven't asked anybody yet. And I kind of looked at him and I said, you know, buddy, that's the first step. But the first step was him reaching out to me as his fellow teacher and as his fellow union member. Like, he felt safe coming to me with those concerns, and that spoke volumes about my relationship with him and the bridge that we were able to make. But he was scared to advocate for himself. And Education Minnesota is not ever scared to advocate for us. And that is one of the powerful things that we have together in this union. I said to my teacher member friend, I will walk with you. We will do this work together. That's the promise that we in this group make with and for each other. We, as our teacher group, we went in for talks about how things went last spring with our admin and how we can improve. Teacher burnout was first and foremost on my mind when we met back in June. And so I had a meeting with our superintendent and our admin, and I said, you know, we got to fix that. We can't have that same garbage happening again. Teachers felt like they were doing 3 times the work. Kids were grazing at their own pace, a choose your own adventure novel of when they can check into class, and it's burning our people out. And you're not going to find anybody to replace these burnt out art teachers, elementary people and sped people in greater Minnesota. You're just not going to do it. They aren't out there. You got to protect them. And our superintendent called out the process today on our big Zoom call with our staff and said, you know what, that impacted what we chose as our model and how we developed our model. And so that's our success story in some small way, about the power of together and the power of our union. But still, you know, the battle does go on. I overheard at a board meeting in our district, how are we going to get these teachers back in the building? They got to be doing some work. And I was livid when I heard that out of that board member's mouth. If they only knew a fraction of the work that we were busting our bottoms to do, they would probably hold their tongue, but it's up to us to educate others about that. I look around our group and I look at some people who are somewhat immunocompromised. Some of them are elderly, teachers at the end of their career who are nervous about their station in life and how this COVID might hurt them. And they're all looking for the answer to this question. How can you possibly help me with what is happening to me? And my answer to them is one word: it's together. We've heard a lot about what's lacking, what's making our schools unsafe, what unhealthy places some of them are turning out to be, and that some buildings and some protocols and some systems that aren't in place, just they're not ready yet. They're not ready for prime time. And many of us are frankly waiting for our buildings and our systems to catch up. And that is where we come in. That is the power of being a worksite unity leader. You get to be an advocate for others. You get to do, in many cases, what you're already doing on a grand scale. You get to help other teachers realize their voice and be that shoulder that my friend needed for others. We are ready in many cases. Teachers are ready, but sometimes our systems and our buildings are not, okay? I have been, and it's not like we're just not ready in the safety aspect. We're not ready in a lot of other ways too. And in many places, for many faces, different color faces, different shapes of faces, law enforcement has amplified the fear that our brothers and sisters across this state feel on a daily basis. And, you know, it's something that first hit me with George Floyd's murder, and then with Jacob Blake being shot in the back, that just about broke me, is that I realized after watching that video of Jacob Blake that I will never have to worry about that. I will never have to go through wondering if I'm going to come home to my kids in the same way that my brothers and sisters have to do. And it makes me sick. Not seeking to understand this problem is wrong. We've heard about health and safety issues. And for many of our members, especially our members of color, our community members and students and their families, this racial justice issue is a safety issue. It is absolutely a safety issue that we have to acknowledge, and we have to own it, and we have to come to it with a clean heart and an open mind. Now, it's hard to switch gears after something like that, and it stays with me all the time. You know, they tell us no one is irreplaceable, right? They say, like my grandpa one time took me through the burial plots of our family, and he said, you know, these graveyards are full of everyone who thought they were irreplaceable. Well, I want to challenge that. I want to say, tell that to the kids who are counting on us for activities, sports, family services, and academics, just to name a few. In many places, we are ready, and we are the ones that are going to be irreplaceable for them if we cannot do our job, because we are either incapacitated, that something is done to us, or we don't feel safe at work. Now, we're told that, you know, they're full of irreplaceable people because we don't want to be thought too highly of ourselves, right? You want to be modest to a certain extent. But I look around this Zoom with over 200 of my closest friends, many of whom I'm meeting for the first time, and I see that this is who you are. You need to know, and you need to believe that to someone somewhere, you are absolutely irreplaceable. Think about that. Think about what you offer those people in your building on a daily basis. That those who are looking for guidance and help, they need someone to turn to. So what do? Who do we turn to? What's involved? Look around this room, this Zoom room. Look around your room, your classroom. Look around your building and reach out. Fight to unite. We have each other. Look out for each other. Help your neighbor and be a friend. Look to them and see yourself in someone else. And most importantly, see others for who they are and what they need. What's really at stake here? What's at stake is a grind. It's either something that's going to grind us down, or that we are going to take forward with empathy and turn into something great. I chose union because this works for me, and my experience with my colleagues at work and their families and my students has inspired me to become a unity leader. You're doing a lot of this work already. You talk to your fellow educators and you're there for them. That's what this is about. And I want you to know that you have a lot of people in this room across the state that are looking forward to have you join us as worksite unity leaders. Thank you.
Okay, next up, I believe we have Vice President Bernie Burnham. Or are you introducing someone else?
I thought that Diana was starting before me.
Okay, Diana.
There we go.
Hello, Education Minnesota members.
Hey.
My name is Diana Ortiz Hedges. I am a teacher from Minnetonka Public Schools, a building rep for my local, and a part of Education Minnesota's Unity team. I sit before you today as an educator from the ranks of people who dedicate their days to lifting up children and giving them the best of ourselves. This includes our creativity, our grit, our love, our protection. I also sit before you as a woman of color. I was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico. When we moved to Minnesota, I found myself in the town Prince lived, the place where we have so much art and beauty. My family and I had found our place in this world. However, all that came to a halt at the end of 2016. From one day to the next, I saw this shift in our community. Our hallways were louder than ever. Kids were anxious. At the time, I worked on one of the most diverse elementary schools in Minnetonka. From one day to the next, a colleague felt she could utter the following words: "There goes the Africa bus." I had never felt more afraid. And in all of that, I felt somehow that I was the problem, that my diversity was to blame. In time, I found people like Natalia Benjamin and Jonathan Kim, who are a part of Education Minnesota Racial Equity Advocacy Team. They taught me that this was a crisis that lived here long before I called this place home. The Coalition for People of Color and Kimberly Colbert allowed me to see that the wound I felt deep in my heart was not my own. It is a collective pain that we all share across Minnesota. I had no idea how to live with it, get rid of it, or ignore it, any of it. I was stuck. It continued to hurt every time someone asked me why my English wasn't broken. It stung with comments like, "But you look so white, and are you a citizen?" It pained me even more when I saw the same students of color as frequent walkers of the hallways, always with an adult, their bodies outside of their groups. My voice was close to gone. I had all but given up. I was ready to throw in the towel. I was tired. I was anxious. I felt powerless to say anything, because whenever I did, it got me in trouble. But my story is not unique. It is not only mine. I share it with people across the nation. When George Floyd was murdered, my fear got angry. I drew the line on the sand. I asked myself, how many more years will we go on ignoring these thoughts and feelings for the status quo? I've found others in my building who share my sense of urgency. They've become my community of healing and hope. I'm done waiting for someone else to fix it. I'm done hoping I'll wake up tomorrow and this Twilight Zone episode will be over. This is my life, the only one I get to live, and I am not waiting another day to figure out how to heal. I am standing here today to ask you, are you ready to be hopeful? Are you ready to turn the page on a new tomorrow? Superman isn't coming. We need to do it like our lives depend on it. Educators across Minnesota are facing one of the most challenging times in all of our career. But one thing I hold dear about Minnesotans is that when we do things together, there is nothing that can get in our way. That is why we're here today. This is all a roadmap of how we will bring our schools together in solidarity to rebuild our communities from the inside out. Now say it with me. I am ready for justice.
I am ready for justice.
I am ready for justice.
I'm ready for
I'm ready for justice.
I'm ready for
justice.
I'm ready.
I'm ready for justice.
I'm ready for justice.
I'm ready for justice.
I'm ready for justice.
I'm ready.
I am ready
I'm
for
ready
justice.
Ready for justice.
I am ready for justice.
I am ready for happiness.
I'm ready for
I'm ready
happiness.
for happiness.
I'm ready for happiness.
I'm ready for happiness.
I'm ready for happiness.
I'm ready for happiness.
We can do it in unity. And now I'm going to be sharing a little bit. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to share a little bit about how we are going to make that happen. So as we move into this roadmap, we need to keep in mind our goals. We have a goal in mind. We have a place where we want to get to. These goals will help ground all of our collective work and keep our eyes on what we want to accomplish. Thank you to those of you who are serving as Worksite Unity leaders. Our power comes from organizing our members, including parents and the community. COVID has highlighted for all of us how little control we have over the decisions that happen in our districts. But there is strength in numbers. A lot of tonight's testimonies speak to how powerful we can be when unified. Now is our chance to demand a seat at the table in decision-making by doing these three things. Build solidarity among your coworkers and with parents and community. Unite a supermajority of your coworkers with parents and community involved around safety and equity demands. Organize your coworkers, parents, and community to join collective actions at the local, regional, and statewide level. We can do it. And if we bring all of our voices together, then we can start. It only takes one step. Now, I am calling for you to have everything begin with just one meeting. Organize a safety and equity meeting for your building in September. The goals will be to determine priority issues and concerns for your building and to begin to build your network of educators, parents, and community members to give you a voice in making decisions. Here are 3 questions that you can use in order to start that conversation at your local level. What most concerns you about your working conditions? And if people can't make it to that meeting, figure out a way to find time for a one-on-one. Those are so powerful. Question number 2, what network do you have or can you put in place for a rapid response around your priority issues or concerns? And what specific action steps can you and your colleagues take to make sure your working conditions and students' learning conditions are equitable and safe? What resources do you have and what are your next steps if your voices are not heard? We can only be successful in advocating for safety and equity if we include our parents, guardians, and other community members. And now it is an honor for me to present Vice President Bernie Burnham, who is going to talk about building parent and community partnerships in a few minutes.
Well, thank you, Diana. So as Diana said, I'm Bernie Burnham, the Vice President of Education Minnesota. The pandemic has revealed some harsh truths about the inequities in our society and taught educators some hard lessons. It has also shown us the central role public schools play in our communities. Because our schools are so much bigger than just what happens in the classroom, we have both an opportunity and an obligation to organize in our neighborhoods. You can think of it in this way. Most of us, whatever our race, gender, or zip code, believe that our families and neighborhoods are stronger, safer, and healthier when we come together to overcome shared challenges and develop collective solutions. Our public schools help keep our communities connected, serving as sites to distribute supplies, provide meals, and keep families informed, even as educators help stop the spread of COVID-19 by educating students at home. But today, a powerful few fuel divisions among us. They resist our efforts to provide quality schools and robust remote learning options for every child in every zip code. Joining together, educators, parents, and community leaders, we can rewrite the rules so the richest and most powerful pay their share, so our communities are strong and our schools have the resources they need to play their full role in the lives of our students and our communities. Educators and parents are already united in communities across this country, as this video will show. It's time to grow the movement here in Minnesota. Can we go ahead and roll the video, please?
Oh, okay. Fine, that's good to know.
All right, so that's how they did it in LA, but we can do it here in Minnesota. As some of you know, I was a teacher in Duluth for many years. While I was there, we worked hard to make sure our community knew we were a part of it. We did this in a variety of ways. We worked hard to find public education friendly leaders to serve on our school board. We door knocked hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder with our collective labor leaders who are also parents and greater community members in Duluth. We worked with other organizations such as Take Action and Moms Demand Action. We worked with the NAACP, and we reached out to our retirees who helped us get folks out to vote. We made and had meetings with our mayor. We had meetings with our city council members, all who were parents in our schools, to ensure that they knew what our needs were and what was best for our students. And we worked in coalition with like-minded folks who supported public education. I hope it's pretty clear why engaging your neighbors is important, but let's talk about how to do it strategically. All of you should have a document from the NEA called 5 Steps for Launching Your Community Outreach and Engagement Programs. I encourage you to read it. There's advice for aligning your local's goals with the goals of groups in your community, for tapping into the networks your members are already part of, and thinking carefully about who can be effective allies in your neighborhoods. The last point in the document is one of the most important. You need to know the reputation of your local in your community. That's really important. If you haven't already done much outreach since the last referendum campaign, you might be seen as opportunistic. That might not feel good, but it's important to know what your local needs to overcome. You might have some listening to do. Which brings me to one last thing to say about this topic. We're asking every worksite Unity leader to be deliberate about reaching out to more people in your own neighborhood, church, or social group in September. Explain what's happening in your local and its concerns face to face, but do it with a mask and 6 feet apart, of course. And we're asking one more thing of you. During the building meetings in September, whatever those meetings may look like, ask your coworkers to go out of their way to have one-on-one conversations with parents. Circle back and gently make sure they follow through. Because this is how we win. Safe and equitable for our members and our students, conversation by conversation, again and again, in community after community, from tomorrow until Election Day. This is how we fight. And as Denise said, when we fight, we win. Now, I'm proud to introduce one of the most inspirational educators in the national stage today, and one of the only classroom educators Betsy DeVos can name off the top of her head. Educators, please give a warm welcome to a fierce defender of our professional and relentless advocate of our profession and relentless advocate for safe and equitable schools for everyone, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten. Welcome, Randy.
So I'm sitting here kind of with all of you, kind of about to have, I must admit, I'm going to actually have my pandemic drink after, which is pomegranate juice and a little seltzer and some vodka. And I'm going to steel myself and brace myself to watch the next 2.5 hours of the Donald Trump propaganda show. And, you know, it was great to have this as a reprieve before that. So, you know, it is, I just heard Diana and I heard Bernie beforehand, or as she was talking about what the NEA has put out. And I want to just take a couple of minutes to actually first thank you for doing these jobs. Denise had this idea a few years ago, and that was very much connected to the fight that we had over Janice. Because Rebecca Friedrich's first turn at the rodeo in the right wing was not the first day of the RNC convention. She brought the Friedrichs case, which happened to be in California initially, and she basically said, the union doesn't represent me. So therefore, I want to actually eliminate the ability for the union to actually operate. And I'm going to try to make people opt out or have people opt out. So whether they get services or not, it doesn't matter. They don't have to pay for it, and they don't have to pay for representation. And she thought, just like Paul Janus, that if they put that out there and if they won in the Supreme Court, that people all across the nation in our unions would basically opt out and would basically say, yes, somebody else can do it. Somebody else can actually represent. But, you know, I got a lot of bills to pay. I can't pay. And you know what happened? And that was part of what Ed Minnesota did. And those of you who were around, you know, just 4 years ago, you know this. We started actually going back to doing things the old-fashioned way. Yes, social media is really great. And yes, we need it now, although we do know that remote education is not a substitute for in-person, but we have to make sure that things are safe before we do in-person. But what we did was we talked to each other. We looked each other in the eyes, not as much on Zoom, more in person. We held each other. We hugged each other. We connected with each other, which is what the union movement did when it started and our union did when it started. We understood the adage in 2016, 2015, 2014, that together we can accomplish more than we could ever accomplish alone. And we actually started empowering each other and having each other's back. And in every school in Minnesota, and I watched it, I went with Denise in some of these schools and some of your schools, we actually started having these kind of unity teams. And you could see that educators wanted to have each other's back. And they knew what UTLA knows, what West Virginia knows, frankly, what St. Paul knows, frankly, what you all know when you elected Governor Walz, which is nothing's ever perfect. Nothing's ever nirvana. One election can't do everything, just like one contract can't do everything. But when we get together and we work together and we actually walk together, shoulder to shoulder, when we actually take care of each other, when we actually take care of community, all of a sudden that activism leads to community working with each other. That's what we learned. That's what we learned in the elections in 18. That's what we've learned in these strikes that we've done. That's frankly what we learned in the aftermath of Janice, when people stuck with union because they wanted to be together. They understood it. And that's what we're learning in this fight about reopening. I remember doing a session like this a few weeks ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. And I was like, Madam Scientist, not that I am a scientist, I'm a social studies teacher and a lawyer, but I've learned from the scientists. And I went through the 5 different things we have to do in terms of making schools safe. And people are like, what are you doing? My point about doing this since April, over and over again, is that we needed to show, I needed to show you I needed to show our state fed presidents. We needed to show the world that even back in April, it was not a matter of if we would reopen schools. It was a matter of when we would reopen schools, because we know in-person schooling is so important. But you know what happened in July? President Trump and Betsy DeVos, they didn't give us the funding. They didn't do a plan. And all of a sudden in July, they decided they were going to set a trap for us and basically say, oh, it's the teachers. It's the teachers that don't want to open schools. It's the teachers that are too scared. They were trying to pit teachers versus parents because you knew, just like what they did when they made us essential workers. We should have been essential workers back in March. They make us essential workers in August. Why do they do that? Because they want to force us to be in school, not quarantine if somebody gets sick. Just like they've done to meatpacking individuals who work in meatpacking facilities. They don't care about us. They don't care about kids. We are dispensable in the push for them to reopen the economy. They don't care about their fact that we have 180,000 people dead. Today, the CDC just tried to pull away the testing requirements. We knew we had to prove to community, just like Bernie said right now about any of these issues, we knew we had to prove to community that we were trying, that we knew that remote education wasn't as good as in person, but that safety came first. And between your work and the work of every other local and state organization that we have had over the course of the last few months, we fought back. We said, Donald Trump, you want to reopen schools in person? Give us the PPE. Give us a plan. Give us the resources. We, in fact, have yet another one of those commercials running during the Republican National Convention today on CNN. It was supposed to run on Fox, but they wouldn't run it. So we took all the money that we were supposed to spend on Fox, we're putting it on CNN, and we're putting it on MSNBC over the next few days so everybody sees who's really responsible for not being able to open schools. You need to fight the pandemic in order to open schools robustly. You need to have the community spread tackle. You need to have a testing, tracing, isolation process. I can go on and on and on. You know I can speak forever on this now. But what happened is that even though we know that people are suffering and kids are suffering and parents are suffering, and there are people that need the childcare because they cannot stay home. The last polling, I just got some more today. People are with us. They understand safety matters. We fought this fight against Trump and DeVos and McConnell. They set a trap for us and it didn't work. You don't hear a thing about this at the RNC right now because the public is with us on this issue. Not everyone, but they're with us on this issue. If we can win this issue in the middle of July, in the middle of a pandemic, when they and the whole Republican National Convention and committee apparatus was against us, you take any issue locally, parents want to be with us. They know how important education is to their kids. They know how important you are. You prove that every single day in March and April and May and June of this year. We just have to figure out how to do this together. And we have to give our members the confidence to know that we got their back, that if they stand up like the educators did in Florida. Do you know how rare it is to win an injunction against the Florida apparatus? But our leaders and our members were willing to fight that fight. And a judge said, no, it has to be safe. The amount of joy in Florida, and I bet in Minnesota on Monday afternoon when we heard the court result, because we knew it confirmed what we knew instinctively in our heart. Unfortunately, there are those who understand power on the other side better than we do. They understand the right to vote, the right to join a union, and the right for public education is the way that regular folks have power. And that's why they go after all of these things. But it is you on a local level with our members, just like we did in Janus, looking at them eyeball to eyeball, socially distant, of course, and with our mask on when we're with each other, of course. but that community that we create, and that community that we create with parents. People need community now. They will be with us if they see us as real and that we pick issues that are real. They'll be with us. We just need to know that we can do it. And I think we've shown over and over again, all fights, there's still a lot to win, but together we can accomplish what we can't accomplish alone. We got to win this election. Without that, we're going to win nothing. You see from what the Republicans are doing, what the dark vision of the future is. They don't care about justice. That word has never been uttered for the last 2 days. They don't care about real opportunity. They care about keeping Donald Trump in power, regardless of what it means. We need to show the contrast. We need to win this election. And yes, we need to win the Senate. Biden and Harris will not be perfect. They will disappoint us at different times. But at the end of the day, they will be hugely, hugely better than anything we have had in the last 2 decades. Just look at the education platform that Lily and I negotiated as part of the Biden-Bernie Joint Task Force. Taking away, stopping high-stakes standardized tests, putting accountability on charters, tripling Title I, making real the promise for IDEA, community schools, reducing student debt. It won't be perfect, but it will be such a better way to do the work you are doing every single day in schools throughout Minnesota. It's lonely to lead. It really is. But you take one step and another step and take the little things and work with our members and work with your colleagues and your friends. And all of a sudden, a little circle becomes a bigger circle and a bigger circle, and other little circles start coming together. And all of a sudden, we become a real community. It really works. I have been in this work for 30 years. I have never been both more hopeful and more scared than at this moment. I'm hopeful because I know the potential. I see the light. I'm scared because there's so much coming at us. But together, we can accomplish what is impossible to do alone. Thank you so much for doing this work. You are doing the righteous work of creating dignity, opportunity, and justice in the way in which, as we march again in Washington this Friday, at a march that Reverend Sharpton announced in Minnesota during George Floyd's funeral. And we talked today, he and I thought, we giggled a moment after we cried about Jacob Blake. We thought people thought we were really crazy, but look at how important it's going to be on Friday. We do righteous work. You do righteous work. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Randy. Really appreciate you being with us tonight. You're the perfect closer and you have the perfect message. Thank you. And glad that this is your high point of your evening. I would have been a little worried. I just also want to thank all of you for sticking around and being part of our assembly thank you to our staff for putting all of this together. Thank you to our wonderful speakers for sharing their stories. Thank you to our Unity Table leaders for talking about what it takes and why we need to build unity right now. And we heard a lot today. We heard local stories, we heard how to win. We talked about how important it is to be unified, working together. I mean, our work right now about being unified around reopening our schools is just a tip of the work that we are going to need to win in November, to win next year at the legislature, and then win at the bargaining table on behalf of our students and our communities. We have a long way to go, and all of you being part of it, being a worksite unity leader, are going to help us get a little bit further to fully funded, racially just schools. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we will be in touch, okay?